He helped create some of the happiest songs the world has ever heard. Music that made people dance without thinking, fall in love without trying, and feel something real even decades later. To millions of people around the world, his work represented joy, connection, and something almost magical. But behind that sound there was another story. A quieter one, a heavier one. Because while the world saw perfect harmonies and smiling faces, the truth inside was far more complicated. The kind of truth that doesn't fit into a 3-minute song. The kind of truth that takes years before someone is ready to talk about it. For a long time, he didn't. He kept things private, focused on the work. Let the music speak instead of explaining what was happening behind the scenes. And maybe that was easier. Maybe putting it into words would have made it too real. But eventually, he started to open up. And when he did, what came out wasn't scandal. It was something much more human. Long before any of that, life looked completely different. There were no sold-out arenas, no global fame, no pressure to live up to expectations. Just a quiet childhood in a simple environment where nothing came easily. Space was limited. Comfort was something you had to create yourself. And like many kids growing up in that kind of setting, he learned early on how to find escape in small things. For him, that escape was music. Not in a dramatic, life-changing moment. It started quietly, listening to songs on the radio, paying attention to melodies, remembering lyrics without even trying. It wasn't just background noise to him. It was something he absorbed, something that stayed with him. And over time, that connection grew stronger. But outside of that, life wasn't always smooth. He didn't quite fit in the way others did. While most people around him followed a more predictable path, he was drawn to something different, something creative, something uncertain. And that difference created distance. There were moments where he felt out of place, moments where it seemed easier to stay quiet than to explain what he was really interested in. But instead of pushing it away, he leaned into it. He kept listening, kept learning, kept building something inside his mind, even before he had the tools to bring it out into the world. When he finally got the chance to play music himself, everything shifted. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was real. He practiced for hours, repeating the same chords, trying to recreate the sounds he had been carrying in his head for years. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But every time he tried, he got a little closer. Confidence didn't come immediately. Standing in front of people, performing, putting yourself out there. That's never easy, especially in the beginning. There were moments where nerves took over. Moments where things didn't go as planned. Forgetting lyrics. Losing focus. Feeling like everyone was watching every mistake. But even then, he didn't stop. Because something about it mattered too much to walk away. As time went on, small opportunities started to appear. Local performances. Collaborations, chances to be part of something bigger than just practicing alone. And with each step, things began to change. Slowly at first, then all at once. Meeting the people who would eventually become part of his journey felt natural. There wasn't a forced connection. It just worked. Different personalities, different strengths. But when they came together, something clicked. The music felt effortless in a way that's hard to describe. But success didn't come right away. There were struggles. Songs that didn't connect the way they hoped. Moments where it felt like they were putting in everything and getting very little in return. Criticism, doubt, uncertainty about whether this path would actually lead anywhere. It would have been easy to stop there, to decide it wasn't worth it. But instead, they adjusted. They paid attention to what worked and what didn't, refined their sound, focused on creating something that felt both personal and accessible. And then, one moment changed everything. A performance that reached beyond their usual audience. A chance to be seen and heard on a much larger scale. Almost overnight, everything shifted. They went from building something quietly to being recognized around the world. And with that recognition came something else. Pressure. Expectations. The kind that doesn't go away once it starts. Suddenly, it wasn't just about making music. It was about maintaining success. Meeting deadlines. Living up to what people now expected from them. And in the middle of all that, there was something else that made it even more complicated: the relationships. Because this wasn't just a professional group. It was personal. At first, that felt like a strength. Real emotions feeding into real music. A connection that went deeper than just collaboration. But over time, that same closeness started to create challenges. When your personal life and your work are so deeply connected, it becomes hard to separate them. Every disagreement carries more weight. Every misunderstanding feels bigger. And slowly, things began to shift. Not in a dramatic way at first. Just small changes. Moments where communication wasn't as easy. Times where distance started to grow even when they were physically close. The demands of their career didn't make it easier. Constant travel, long hours, very little time to process what was happening emotionally. And eventually, it started to take a toll. He later explained that it wasn't just one thing that caused the breakdown. It was a combination of everything. The pressure, the exhaustion, the feeling of being pulled in different directions at the same time, and the realization that something that once felt strong and natural was slowly becoming difficult to hold on to. When the relationship ended, it wasn't just a private moment. It was public. People noticed. Fans who had seen them as something ideal suddenly had to adjust to a different reality. But what made it even more intense was what came next. Because instead of stepping away, he turned to what he knew best. He wrote. Not to explain everything, not to defend anything, but to process it, to make sense of emotions that didn't have easy answers. And what came out of that was something powerful. A song that carried real weight, real feeling, every word shaped by something personal. And then came the decision that made it unforgettable. She would sing it, standing there, facing lyrics that reflected something they had both experienced. It wasn't just another recording session. It was something much deeper. He later admitted that he understood how difficult that moment must have been. But at the time, the focus was on creating something honest. And when she sang, it worked. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. People could feel it. Even without knowing the full story, there was something in the performance that connected. Something that went beyond the music itself. But while the world heard something beautiful, the reality behind it was still complicated. The group continued. More songs, more performances, more success. But internally, things had changed. There was a different energy now. A sense of fatigue that hadn't been there before. Creative differences started to appear. And the balance that once held everything together was no longer as stable. He later described those years as emotionally heavy. Not because of failure, but because of everything happening beneath the surface. Eventually, it reached a point where continuing in the same way didn't feel possible anymore. And instead of a dramatic ending, it happened quietly. Less activity, more distance, until it simply stopped. For the outside world, it felt sudden. But for those involved, it had been building for a long time. After that, life moved forward. Different projects, new directions, opportunities to explore things outside of what they had been known for. But the past didn't disappear. And over time, he became more open about it. Not in a way that placed blame, but in a way that acknowledged reality. He spoke about the difficulty of balancing love and ambition, about how success can sometimes create distance instead of connection, about how easy it is to lose track of what matters when everything around you is moving so fast. And perhaps most importantly, he spoke about the emotional cost. Because from the outside, everything looked perfect. But inside, it was far more complicated. Despite everything, there was no regret about the music. Because even the most difficult moments had contributed to something meaningful. Something that lasted. Something that continued to connect with people long after those moments had passed. Years later, when there was a chance to revisit that legacy, it wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward with a different perspective, a deeper understanding, and a recognition that even though that chapter had been complicated, it had also been important. The truth he eventually shared wasn't dramatic in the way people might expect. There were no shocking twists, No hidden secrets waiting to be revealed. Instead, it was something much more relatable. A story about love that didn't last the way people hoped. About success that came with unexpected challenges. About the difficulty of holding onto something while everything around you is changing. And in the end, that's what makes it powerful. Not the fame, not the success, but the honesty. Because behind every great piece of music, there's a story. And sometimes, that story is far more emotional than anyone realizes.